Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 7, Episode 17. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
In this solo episode, we have part one of our very popular predictions recap episodes, where we take a look back at Steve's, your retail predictions, and like any good retailer should, basically grade the performance, look at the data, and the actual outcome versus predicted, proof points, or I don't know, see how far base off these predictions were or how accurate. It's been a super dynamic year. So I was reading, off mic, I was reading through the notes that you sent me, and I'm like, yeah, we did say that. Oh, we did. Oh, wow, that's a surprise. So I'm looking forward to this episode.
Well, we're all about accountability here on the podcast. So we gotta eat our own cooking or whatever the experience or that expression, whatever is. So yeah, I think this is like the fourth or fifth year that I've done predictions, and as folks will hear in a second, I still haven't learned some things about how to make predictions. But that's a different topic. But
it's the journey of Steve. It's the journey of the prediction.
It's the journey. But anyway, we'll see how I did.
So let's talk about the new book a little bit. Where are you with Leaders Leap? It's coming out in March, and what are you doing between then and now, and to support the book?
Well, three things I'll mention. One is I am just about signing off on the final manuscript, which includes having gotten endorsements from some really exciting people. So I'll be talking about that more shortly, but there might be...
call that in the trade, you call that blurbing, right?
That is a blurb, and there might be a prior Remarkable Retail guest or two or three that folks will see were kind enough to say nice things about the book.
And that becomes a verb, right? They blurb your book.
They blurb my book.
There you
Correct.
Go. Tradecraft there for everybody.
And then so shifting to marketing, so starting to work with my PR firm and others, looking at events and so forth. So if anybody is interested in potentially hosting a book tour or something like that, feel free to reach out to me. We're starting to take a look at that. And then the last thing I'll just mention quickly is I just launched a special group on LinkedIn, a Leaders Leap group. And that's a place for people to join if they're interested in maybe getting a little bit more detail about what's going on, getting a preview of some of the content. We will be launching some pre-order specials, so those will be available in the group, as well as I think we'll probably end up talking about those on the podcast. So yeah, lots going on.
Let's go into news of the week. So the first piece of news of the week is a surprise. Talk about U.S. unemployment. I thought it was going in one direction, but it looks like it's going in another.
Yes, more and more, I think economists' ability to nail some of these predictions is not quite as good as my predictions, I would say, in some respects. But no, it's been very difficult, and it still continues to be confusing. So yeah, we started to hear last, 2 months that, obviously the unemployment picture is still pretty strong, but maybe a bit of weakening. And so this morning, as we're recording this, out comes the unemployment or the employment figures that show that unemployment went down. So at 3.9%, down to 3.7%. So really no evidence that the job market, at least in the U.S., is weakening. And as part of that report, they also share what's going on with wages. And there was pretty good wage growth. So yeah, it's the economy just keeps seeming like it's humming along.
It's fascinating stuff. Now, speaking of different puts and takes, get it? We're going to talk about NRF and what they're saying about organized crime. It seems like they're going backwards. That they're thinking maybe they were a little too quick to blame retail organized crime on the amount of shrink.
Yeah. Well, this is once again we have our ever popular "I told you so," where we. Throughout
we've talked about a sound for that. We got to come up with a sound for that.
There we go. All right, we may have to workshop that a bit more, but not bad for first effort. But yeah, we've of course talked about retail shrink, retail theft several times during the course of the year because it's become a popular topic, and it's still absolutely an issue.
Yep.
But the NRF decided to do an update of a report they had done earlier in the year. And I think it was actually Retail Dive, which that publication, which had crunched some numbers and said, I think you actually may have some errors here in this report. So anyway, the net of all that is NRF had said, actually, when we said organized crime was responsible for like 50% of the theft. That was way too high. It's not nearly as important. So again, not that it isn't an issue, but kind of blaming the issue on organized crime increase, probably not so true. I think what is true is some of the things we talked about in the past. There's lots of pieces of the retail shrink equation. I think that a lot of buy online, pick up in store, and a lot of this kind of hybrid retail, that's the inventory accuracy is, I think, a real issue. And it's why I think at one point we talked about how Nordstrom Rack, they were stopping doing buy online, pick up in store because they couldn't keep track of the inventory. So I think there's a lot of issues that are driving the number that are related to inventory accuracy, in addition to theft, in addition to all the other kind of things that drive the shrink number up.
Let's talk about Amazon. So it's not often we would say the words Amazon and nervous in the same sentence, but they do seem to be thinking a little more about our China factory direct friends, Shein and Temu.
Amazon, well, the news is that Amazon is revising some of their seller fees for apparel in particular, where they're lowering the fee starting in January, basically depending upon the price of the item. So lowering it from 17% to 10% for items priced between $15 and $20, and down to 5% for pieces running below $15. Now, it just turns out that those kind of are the sweet spots of pricing for both Shein and Temu. So coincidence? I don't think so. But, if you think about it, the growth, as we've talked about many times, and everybody in the industry is talking about the phenomenal growth of Shein and Temu, where is that business coming from? There's some evidence. There's a study, I think this past week, that it's coming from some dollar stores and other discounters, but it's got to be something that Amazon has to be concerned about. So they're trying to make it a little bit more economical for people to sell on the platform.
What did you say on LinkedIn? Race to the bottom, and I said yes. It's also a race to the landfill because
that's right. Yeah, that was a good line.
Thank you.
Well played.
Just one quick commentary. Amazon, going back in the time tunnel, they were the big beneficiary of a tax benefit where they could ship to home. It's one of the reasons they located in Seattle to begin with, in Washington State, because it's all this stuff about Nexus and not having to charge consumers tax based on some old catalog legislation that was then corrected in the fullness of time by Congress. It's interesting because it seems that basically, Shein and Temu are taking advantage of their own little loopholes, right? They've got the International Postage Union loophole, so they can ship super cheap, and they've got the de minimis, not loophole, but standard, where they can ship without taxes. So it's interesting that it's not unprecedented that a new disruptor would take advantage of a loophole. But I think the International Postage Union loophole is just harder to close, I think, for everybody.
But if that were right, if those were to get addressed, the economics of those two businesses would change quite a lot.
I used to say when I did media reports around Christmas and gasoline prices were high, that for every liter, as we would say up here in Canada, that goes into the gas tank, it's another Christmas present that doesn't show up underneath the Christmas tree. But we're seeing some actually lower gas prices. So, what do you think the impact is going to be?
Well, I think the first thing to say, because we are all about accountability on this show, is I got this completely wrong earlier this year. I suspected or predicted that gas prices were likely to stay high for a bunch of reasons that, like I said, apparently I didn't understand very well. So, gas prices have continued to trend down. They're the lowest in the U.S. anyway in 11 months. They're down over 15% in just the last couple of months. I mean, obviously, for lots of people, this kind of savings, depending on how much you drive, right, can be quite considerable and be a real relief.
It's real cash. It's real cash.
So depending upon whether you want to spend that on holiday gifts or what have you, in a place where inflation has been obviously something that's been very hurtful to consumers, this is really a positive. So we'll see if they stay low, and we'll see if it will be meaningful in terms of retail spending over the next few months.
I was watching, and this is going to sound like I'm going off on some tangent, but I really have a point here. I was watching Golda on Netflix, the great, kind of a made-for-TV movie about Golda Meir during the early 70s and the conflict there. And it was interesting because they had somebody playing Henry Kissinger, and he said, listen, the gas prices are going crazy. You remember those days, the early 70s, where gas prices and at the throttle that the Middle East oil states had on gas prices in America. That's just, it feels like the framework has changed, like the paradigm has changed because maybe there's so many electric cars, they don't have the same throttle. I mean, you would typically, when you've got a conflict like what's going on in Gaza and Israel, you typically would have seen gas prices go up, but it's not happening. So I'm just kind of commiserating with your prediction, because in the context of history, that's exactly what should have happened. Gas prices should be exploding, literally or figuratively, but they're not. So interesting, right?
Yeah. A lot of different and unusual dynamics, which does make it hard to kind of see where things are likely to go. Invest in a workable crystal ball. I do not have one.
Well, let's talk about Neiman Marcus and Saks. So somebody looks like they got left at the altar in a marriage here by the reading through the tea leaves. What did you make of this?
Well, we talked, I guess it was last week or the week before, about how Saks having some issues paying vendors. So Saks said that they don't have any immediate liquidity problems at the moment anyway because of that action. And we've, I think, talked about this, and I certainly have written about it, that there have been rumors and various efforts, including some I may or may not have been involved in, with putting Neiman Marcus and Saks together in the past. Talks apparently have been quite significant over the last several weeks, but the news report was that Neiman Marcus basically said, you haven't presented us an offer. There was reported to be about a $3 billion offer to be acquired by Saks. Just as context, when I was at Neiman Marcus quite a long time ago now, in 2005, we got acquired for $5 billion. So to flash forward here, do whatever inflation calculation you want to put in there and think about a $5 billion company, which just, that had performed kind of in an average fashion would be worth, $7-8 billion maybe, maybe getting sold for $3 billion. I think that tells you a lot about how things have gone. But I still believe this needs to happen. We'll talk about it maybe a little bit in the context of predictions. But so there's lots of interest here. There's reasons to do it. I think the probably current economic environment combined with the sort of price that Saks is talking about and interest rates and all that kind of stuff may make it difficult to get this across the finish line in the next few months.
And a quick shout out to our friend Lauren Thomas, a reporter at the Wall Street Journal, who was a former retail reporter at CNBC. We miss her, but it's great to see her reporting work, and she's been doing some great reporting on this deal. So shout out to Lauren if she's, I don't know, does she still listen to this stuff? I don't know. Who knows?
She's probably got better things to do, but
we put her in the show notes or something.
Yeah.
That'll come up. Speaking of, I guess, trouble, Farfetch put out a very strangely worded, we're not going to tell you anything kind of, which tends to be, like maybe they need a cash injection or something, like they're in trouble. Basically.
Yeah, they're definitely in trouble. They've been, I think several episodes back, we talked a little bit about their troubles. Their stock prices collapsed. They've been trying to put a deal together, it sounds like, to get acquired. That, as of Friday anyway, hasn't happened yet. Maybe some news will break before folks listen to this episode.
Who would be a potential to buy them at this point? Who would buy that business? Is that a Neiman Marcus business? Is that a Nordstrom? And like, who would buy somebody like that? Private equity group, I suppose, but...
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure that. I mean, the benefit, I guess, of Farfetch is that it's got a pretty substantial customer base.
Sure.
They made a name for themselves. They got relationships and all those kinds of things. So there's some equity there. It's just that the business is like so many of these disruptor brands, particularly the ones that are online only, just haven't found a way to get close to profitability. And so what it's going to take to keep the business afloat and make some investments. So this is another one. I think we've talked about this sort of thing where there may be some interested parties, but they might be people saying, "Well, these guys file, and then I can come in and pick it up for pennies on the dollar," as opposed to whatever they're trying to do right now. So it's not a very happy story. But let's maybe talk about something more happy, which is, but not fashion related, is that camp.
Happy campers.
Happy campers. We had Ben Kaufman, the founder and CEO, on the podcast, I think about 2 years ago now. So people that aren't familiar, camp is this, I guess you'd say, experiential learning toy book seller got several stores now and have been expanding. And this kind of came out of left field that they were doing an experiment with Bonvoy, the big hotel operator. I'm sure most people are familiar, the owner of Marriott and Westin, a bunch of other hotel brands, to run the kids club at Bonvoy Resorts. And I think it's a very clever way to presumably make some revenue, but to really expand the reach, and but not in a traditional retail sense. So anyway, maybe we'll have to get Ben back on the podcast at some point. Now this is very early days. This is not they've decided to roll it out to 1,000 locations or something like that. But some real creativity there from one of the more interesting retail concepts that have emerged in the past few years.
Well, structurally, the toy business is in steep decline. Mastermind Toys, specialty retailer in Canada, just went into protection, and they talked about 22% year-over-year decline in sales. Like, there was a lot of people who bought a lot of stuff.
Yikes.
And that was the case in 2019, like heading into the pandemic, structural decline because toys became electronics and kids were just asking for, iPhones instead of other toys. So it's a good initiative for our toy retailer to go out and find other revenue streams, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's interesting when you think about how to kind of amplify the wow when you're a hotel brand, like bringing something new.
I like it.
Rather than kind of the typical kids club that probably some of us have experienced over the years. It's pretty interesting. But it remains to be seen how big and bold this will get.
Let's do a quick rundown of earnings. There's three retailers that we often cite as remarkable. So let's start with RH.
Yeah, just real quickly, in the interest of time, we're getting to the end of earnings season here. And RH, we talked about last week in terms of their store openings in Indianapolis and Germany. They reported quarterly earnings, which again were pretty disappointing. Weak sales, lowered profits, though still profitable. Gary Friedman, who always writes an entertaining quarterly, entertaining, I'm putting in air quotes for those of you who can't see me, sometimes ranty, sometimes interesting, but really talked about it until the home market gets unfrozen with lower interest rates. It's going to be tough for them to really drive the business upward. But this is not, and I think this is an example of where you have confidence in your business model, maybe a little bit crazy, but also have a good balance sheet. They're continuing with their expansion. So not only what we talked about with Indianapolis and Germany, but they will be opening in the first half of next year, new RH galleries in Brussels and in Madrid, and I guess later in the year in Paris on a little place called the Champs-Élysées. So I'm sure that's very inexpensive real estate. So they're going big or going home. So and then the other two I'll just mention real quickly. Brands we often talk about. Lululemon continues to roll on. Strong sales growth, I think up like 19%. Improved earnings, continuing to open stores. The thing that got their stock a little bit in the wrong side of the ledger was that they said that they're seeing some slowness in their business as well. So I think they joined just about every retailer on the planet that says we're kind of worried about holiday and early part of next year. Ulta, we've had Dave Kimball, the CEO, on the podcast. They just keep rolling along. 6% sales increase. They are now, I just wanted to check the numbers. They now have almost 1,400 stores.
Wow.
In all 50 states. So they're not international yet, but I imagine that could happen. They're continuing to expand their presence at Target. People are probably familiar. They've added quite a few shops within a shop. But, a little bit of weakness in terms of margin performance. But, this is a huge, it's a $10 billion business, I think, annually now. And so, it's kind of really amazing they continue to put, get store openings and good sales increases despite the maturity of that business.
Let's move into our sector with the wobbly unicorn. I love that music.
Maybe next year we'll not have to go to the wobbly unicorn corner quite so much, though. I suspect that's probably not true.
I don't know. Let's talk about Chewy. Making big news in the pet business, but how's their business going?
Well, what's interesting here, and their stock took a big hit on this announcement, they did report sales growth of 8%, which, most retailers would be very happy with 8%. But given this is supposedly, this exploding category, a real growth business, having 8% sales growth made people go like, maybe there's not as much runway here, so to speak. We'll talk about a different runway in a minute. They are improving profitability, and some of that's just fixed cost leverage. Some of that is some cost takeouts, which we're seeing across the board. The so-called year of living efficiently. They're still losing money on a GAAP basis, but they are making strides towards positive cash flow. So one of the folks that are wondering about why they're seeing this slowdown is there's this sense that perhaps Amazon and brick and mortar retailers that are strong in the pet category, maybe there's just not as much available market for a pure online player as was originally thought, which of course is a pattern we've been talking about for 2 years. That these are bad businesses. It's just that the total addressable market as an online only business may not be. I think actually in most cases it's being proven not as big. So improving performance, but it's definitely some concerns about what the growth outlook looks like.
You mentioned Runway. Let's talk about Rent the Runway. Looks like they got a little more runway. Talk about that a bit.
Yeah, well, last thing we'll talk about before we wrap up are Rent the Runway and Stitch Fix, and kind of a similar story in that both are making some progress in terms of lowering costs. Both are trying to refocus their business for greater success. Both are continuing to show sales decreases. So in Rent the Runway's case, their sales were down 6%. But the main story for both of these companies were their attempts to improve their liquidity. So both companies had fairly weak balance sheets, and given the pace of their business, it's a little more fraught with danger in the future. So Rent the Runway has, and I won't go into all the details, but they basically agreed with their lenders to not make any interest payments for a while and refinanced some stuff that will give them more room to try to figure things out. This business, not only is not growing, but if you look at the valuation, it's only valued at $43 million. This is a business that at one point was, the stock's down 97%. So there's definitely an expectation a couple of years ago this was going to be a much bigger business. Billions. Yeah. So, but they're trying to right the ship here, and it's good that they've given themselves some more time. And similarly with Stitch Fix, their business was down 18%. They're also going through a refocusing. They're going to try to move their assortment more to private label, which presumably gives them better margins. And they also are doing some refinancing activity. So, these two businesses, had they not done some things on the balance sheet side of the equation, as well as what they need to do to improve their operating performance, these were definitely edging their way towards Chapter 11 or some sort of distress sale. So they've bought themselves some time, which is good for them. That obviously some of the lenders have confidence that this thing can be turned around.
All right. Well, let's leave it there and let's get into predictions. Part 1. Let's start by, and we'll follow this kind of route or regime where I'll remind the folks of the predictions you made, and then we'll give you, or you give yourself, a grade on how you did. So let's start at the beginning. Number 1, physical experiences matter even more in a digital world.
Yeah, so here's at the top of the show, I mentioned that I still haven't really learned my lesson on how to make predictions because this one is hard to exactly grade because there's just enough data. So I would say it's kind of incomplete, or it's true-ish, not to be confused with George Santos being Jew-ish. What I meant by this,
we should buy a Cameo, by the way.
We should.
He's on Cameo now. That could kind of be.
Yeah, but what I meant by this was that if we think about what I've talked about a bunch in the past, this difference between buying versus shopping, or errands versus experiences, or jobs versus joys, is that if you're going to try to get people to go to a store, if you're on more of an errand, then the physical experience has to be efficient. Provide enough value to cause you to go to the store rather than just buy it on Amazon as an example.
Yeah,
right. So there's the one side of the equation, which is investing in convenience. And we've definitely seen a lot of, robotics and buy online, pick up in store, and a lot of things that are meant to make the shopping experience in store faster, more efficient. At the other end of the spectrum, and one of the reasons why brick and mortar continues to be superior to online shopping in many cases is if you're trying to get an experience or joyful, then there really needs to be something that's really additive to what you can get online. And so that's where we see stores like we've talked about, RH, that just create these beautiful environments, help you picture how the items would look in your store, maybe have a cafe or, what have you.
I was in the new Petco in Manhattan in Union Square, and they had like a whole chef that would make the food there for your dog. I mean, it's just, not just bags of dog food, just exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. So we're definitely seeing accelerating investment in reasons to go to the store, whether it is the speed of convenience or it's the more experiential. So I would say, like I did at the top, that it's true-ish, but it's a little bit hard for me to give myself a strong letter grade. But listeners will be happy to know that I didn't totally cop out on every other prediction.
All right, so we're starting off with no letter grade. Let's get to number 2. C-suite changes.
Incomplete.
Incomplete.
Pass-fail, maybe? I don't know.
I don't know. C-suite changes will accelerate.
Yeah, so what was behind this, I mean, it's probably self-evident, but I just believe that given the generally poor performance and in some cases the spreading of disappointing performance throughout retail, that this would lead to leadership changes. And I would say overall, this is true. I gave myself a B-. We have seen, I would say in general, more turnover than we've seen in the year prior, and turnover at some pretty big name retailers like Gap, Macy's, Kohl's, a bunch of the digitally native vertical brands, et cetera. So from that standpoint, I'd probably say it's closer to an A. But the other part of this prediction was not only would we see C-suite changes, but we'd see more diversity in the C-suite. And unfortunately, we've taken a step back there. I mean, some notable examples, actually, this technically is not happening until January, but Michelle Gass will be taking over the helm at Levi's. And, there's some other prominent women leaders. But I think we talked about on the podcast a couple months ago that there was a study by Korn Ferry, I think it was, showing how if you look at most of the major CEO slots that were filled, they were not filled by diversity candidates. They were filled by sort of the traditional older white male.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you give yourself? What's the grade?
I would say B+.
All right, number 3, disruptor reset. Pretty rough year, I think, for retail disruptors. Talk about it.
So for folks that, I'm sure we'll put this in the show notes, but you can see the full glory of these predictions at Forbes piece I did as well as on my blog. But the explanation here was, 2022 was a pretty rough year for most of these disruptor brands. So by that we mean, the digitally native vertical brands, but also some models that are not necessarily digitally native vertical brands, but newer brands that are reshaping parts of the retail market. And so 2022 was a rough year. I said that, that would continue, but also that we would start to see some more significant actions being taken to try to right the ship. So in the news segment, we talked about several of these. Allbirds, which is not only continuing to struggle, but some of the reset there is stopping their store expansion, moving to wholesale. So we've seen lots of these retailers that once thought they were going to be, online only, and then maybe there would be mostly their own stores, exploring wholesale. As we talked about in the news, people recapitalizing. We've seen several bankruptcies, several acquisitions. So quite a lot of activity here. So I would say overall, I pretty much nailed this one. I'd give myself an A.
All right, let's move to the next one. Media networks grow fast, but start to experience growing pains. My goodness, there's no shortage of continued talk about retail media networks as the big kahuna. What's your assessment?
Well, so what I meant by the growing pains was that my main thing was like, it wasn't going to be so easy to get this phenomenal growth because of issues like attribution, who's in charge of it, how do you make decisions between the different media buyers or marketing folks at companies. I thought there was a lot of silo kind of issues that would emerge. So this one's a little bit hard to tell how correct I am. I would say that there's no question that retail media networks continue to grow, but 75% of the retail media market is Amazon. So, when you talk about they continue to grow. It's clearly very profitable. Then, it's a big drop down to Walmart and Kroger. And then basically everybody else, for the most part, is a rounding error. So I think it's just hard to tell in a broad statement for the retail industry what this looks like. I suspect one of the reasons why some brands like Gap have backed out, while others are not doing as much, is it's just not clear what the ROI looks like, or it's not clear how to manage it. So my sense is I'm sort of kind of right. It's not as if the growth in retail media is slowing down. And actually, eMarketer, our friends at eMarketer, just updated their forecast for the next 5 years, and they've taken the forecast up. Yeah. So I'd give myself at best a B on this one.
Okay. All right. Number 5, bold changes hit the Amazon retail flywheel. So we've certainly talked about them closing stores. I wouldn't call that bold, but what do you mean and what do you think?
A lot of this related specifically to where they were with grocery, which going into the year, or I guess going back a year or so, they had all these great plans for both grocery and then potentially for Amazon Go and Amazon Style. Really they have done a pretty complete reset on what they're doing in physical retail. They stopped the expansion of grocery, basically said, we've gotten it wrong.
Yeah. Even after building stores. I mean, like,
yes, they mothballed.
Yes.
I'm not even sure what the number is, but a bunch of stores that were ready to open haven't opened and aren't opening. And they are now starting to pilot a different approach. So they've really, on the one hand, said they're still committed to grocery, but they're now going about it in a very different way. And at this point, it's hard to tell exactly what that's going to look like. But so that was the big thing that happened. The second thing that happened is they closed Amazon Style. So this idea that they were going to make a big play in the apparel/department store kind of space, that was an experiment they pulled the plug on. So the 2 stores in Southern California and Columbus are now closed.
Good for them. We'd applaud initiatives like that. Try something, but don't let it linger and just wither. Just cut it off.
Right. And Amazon Go as a retail concept doesn't seem to be going anywhere. So at this point, and I'll talk about Whole Foods in a second, but when you look at the kind of Amazon branded brick and mortar experiment, they've hit a wall and are hitting reset. But it seems like all their efforts at this point are more or less grocery centric. They also, this isn't specifically, this is why I said flywheel, because I didn't mean to make it just about the physical stores themselves, but they are and have been investing to improve delivery speed. So less things on the supply chain, they've been taking costs out. So quite a lot of activity to try to kind of reboot, restart their efforts here. Now, Whole Foods is a little bit different, and it actually ties to a later prediction we'll get to in part 2. Whole Foods hasn't changed very much. They've got a new leader there. They're trying some new things. The results have been a bit better. But I wouldn't say that's a reset. It's still just kind of out there. But Whole Foods in the scheme of the whole equation is pretty tiny. So overall, I gave myself an A. And a lot still to see. It's going to be an interesting story for next year, I'm sure.
Let's talk about the number 6. The collapse of the unremarkable middle picks up steam.
Yeah, so this gets back to something I've been talking about for a long time, the bifurcation of retail, that success is being found on the value end of the spectrum, whether that's store openings or growth, profits, et cetera. And at the other end of the spectrum, more on the high end. I would say, I mostly got this right because what I thought was going to happen was that it was going to be increasingly hard for folks trapped in the middle to have any level of success. So if you look at the poor performance from major retailers, the easy ones to think about are the department store guys. They all had a terrible year. Gap, Foot Locker, Victoria's Secret, a lot of these, kind of mid-priced, neither fish nor fowl kind of retailers, all have had terrible years. Not a lot of store closings. And the thing that I did get wrong about this was I expected more store closings. Now, we had Bed Bath & Beyond go completely away.
Yep.
Rite Aid's in bankruptcy, closing hundreds of stores. There's a bunch of retailers that have gone bankrupt or closed a bunch of stores. So it's not like it hasn't happened. I expected a little bit more activity. But I think the reason it didn't happen, as we've touched on, is this retail year ended up being better than we thought going into it. So I thought that we would see less consumer spending, that would push more either retailers or stores to the brink. So that didn't quite play out the way I expected. But overall, if you look at where the big weakness in retail is, it's very much in the unremarkable middle.
All right. What do you grade? How do you grade yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. A-.
Let's go to number 7. The hybridization of retail steals the crown from omni-channel. This might be confusing to some people. What do you mean here?
Well, so I did give myself a grade, but this is another one that's a little bit hard to quantify. So what I meant is that there has been historically, as you well know, lots of this kind of channel-centric thinking, and omni-channel has become this buzzword. But the thing that always, but like for a decade has bothered me is just so much focus on this channel-centric language and a lot about creating the seamless experience. I think what has definitely evolved pretty rapidly, not only in, tangible activities, which I'll talk about in a second, but even in the language, this idea of retail being more hybrid. In other words, stores aren't just for singular purpose. They serve as marketing, they serve as service centers, they serve as fulfillment centers. So I think there's much more recognition in the industry of this idea that retail, that shopping in general is more hybrid. It's less about channels and integration. It's about blending them in a greater fashion. So I think the conversation has moved more towards hybridization versus omni-channel or seamless integration or what have you. But the other thing more specifically is that we just see a lot of investment continue in this arena. When we look at what Walmart is doing with their massive investment we talked about several weeks ago, what Target continues to do, what lots of retailers tend to do is to create, particularly their stores, as a more hybrid operation, serving both the walk-in, walk-out kind of customer, but a lot of things related to the digital shopping experience, whether that is buy online, pick up in store, or return to store, or, the explosion of ship from store, whether that's the local home delivery or parcel. That is a big, big shift. So that's really what I mean about it. Like I say, it's a little bit hard to quantify. So I gave myself a B+. Yeah, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right. Well, that's part one of our predictions recap episode. We'll be back with part two. Lots more great predictions to critique. Let's leave it there for now. If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, your favorite podcast platform, so you can catch up with all our great interviews, including Anish Melwani, Chairman and CEO of LVMH North America. New episodes of Season 7 will show up each and every Tuesday. Be sure and tell your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us.
And I'm Steve Dennis, author of the best-selling book, Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption, and the forthcoming Leader's Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, which will be published in March 2024 and is now available for pre-order at book retailers everywhere. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker, and producer of a host of series of retail trade podcasts, including this one. You can learn even more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.